Welcome, guys, back to the I Love Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, as always, Justin Wright. Today, we have a special guest. Some of you may know him from his time in WWE as Chris Masters. Lately, he's gone by the ring name Chris Adonis. How are you doing, man?
What's going on? Good to be here with you.
I'm excited. I hate saying this sometimes, but I watched you growing up, and I was always the John Cena kid. So, like, growing up, seeing you put him in the Masterlock hurt me. So, I'm excited to get to talk about it a little bit.
It's funny because I meet a lot of guys like you, even in the independent wrestling scene. There's a lot of guys who are in their 20s who, their first experiences of watching wrestling were of that kind of era. There was, like you said, with Cena. He wrestled me in that time, amongst many others, obviously. So, it's not out of the ordinary for me, is what I'm saying.
What have you been up to lately? Like, what's been the new happenings in 2025?
Well, I mean, 2025 is so new, right? But last year, I was able to become the Stu Hart Heritage Heavyweight Champion. That's the promotion that, Bret Hart and Dallas have over there in Calgary. They're trying to continue in the tradition of Stampede Wrestling from way back when, which a lot of people remember. And then I also won the Puerto Rico WWC World Heavyweight Champion. And so I was holding both of those belts at the same time for a good part of the year. But since then, I've dropped those titles. And then, I've been just continuing on the independent wrestling scene and got some stuff cooking in April that I don't want to talk about yet because it hasn't been announced and I don't know how they're approaching it. But it's not WWE related. We'll just get that one out of the way.
All right. Um, Actually, my last question of the day was going to be about the Stu Hart Championship, heavyweight championship. But I'm gonna start with
I'm
there.
getting ahead of us here. Look at that. Sorry
It's
about that.
it's like you read my mind.
Uh,
I saw online that it was a pretty emotional win. How did it feel to be able to win that championship and kind of hold that lineage?
it meant a lot to me because when you grew up in my era, which was goes back obviously farther than yours, um, the hearts meant a lot, and I understand that you would still recognize that, and younger fans would. But I grew up watching Brett, Owen, Jim Neihart. I lived through all of that, and throughout all of that, Stu Hart was always praised and put on a pedestal, and just admired. And so it definitely meant a lot to me because of that. And it was also because it felt like, it did feel slightly like an endorsement from Bret the Hitman Hart, which to me is amazing because I look at Bret as one of the all-time best ever in the ring, or just overall in the business, and at least in my book. So, you know, those those things mean a lot. And so yeah, it was really cool. I took a lot of pride in wearing that belt. And every time I wrestled for not Stampede, but Dungeon Wrestling, or took that belt to the ring, I made sure that I went out there and I gave it my all and put on the best match possible.
I usually start here on the podcast. So I'm gonna jump back to the start. We are the I Love Wrestling podcast, Mr. Chris Masters. When did you find wrestling and how'd you fall in love with it?
uh, you know, really young. I was probably like maybe 8, 9 years old, and the Ultimate Warrior was the wrestler that captivated my interest. The face paint. The face paint was a big thing for me initially. Like I really liked all the face painted wrestlers. Demolition, the Legion of Doom, the Ultimate Warrior. But the Ultimate Warrior, particularly, the body, the music, the persona. I mean, it was just the perfect cocktail, especially as a kid. So yeah, he kind of got me watching, and I was just when I grew up. You were talking about probably being a John Cena kid. I think you said
Yeah.
when I was growing up, you were either a Hogan guy or you're a Warrior guy. for for a majority of my childhood. I guess then after that you would have been a Shawn or Brett guy, and then after that you would have been a Stone Cold or Rock guy. So that's the evolution of the business.
You brought up face paint, and that's something that's crazy because that's one of the things that's always captivated me. Like, I got countless pictures of me wearing Sting face paint, any era of Sting face paint, or even Jeff Hardy. Like, so has that ever been something that you've thought about bringing to the table, like for your persona?
No, not for me, because and I did paint my face once for just like a tribute we did for the Warrior, but I didn't like the way it looked.
Okay.
And quite frankly, when you're this pretty, right? Like you
You
don't
don't
want
want to cover up the
to.
masterpiece.
but but no, it was a big deal for me for a while. I don't think it was later on though. You know what I mean? I think as
Okay.
I grew up, I didn't care as much, but definitely as a kid, man, like the mystique of it, the mystery of it, and never seeing the Warriors just bare face, and I don't know what it is, man. It's just kind of maybe part of being kind of superhero esque a little bit, especially to a kid.
if if you had to pinpoint a moment in time that like really made you decide to start training, what would you have to credit that to?
Well, I don't know what that specific moment is. I'll say this. I stopped watching. I watched wrestling from the point I told you on for quite a few years. And then I had a couple of years where I was basically took a break from it, like a lot of people do. Didn't watch wrestling, got into other things. And then I got brought back in because I was just flipping through the channels and I saw the Shawn Michaels concussion angle they were doing. And I really liked Shawn Michaels after the Warrior. Warrior was coming and going a lot. So in that time, I started kind of Shawn had went singles, and I started really taking a liking to Shawn, also Brett, but particularly Shawn. Just I love the persona, the selling. Just I don't know. I I really dug that whole thing. And so when I was flipping through the channels just a couple of years later and I saw him, I totally bought into the whole angle. I was like, wait, what happened? Shawn got hurt. He might get not wrestle again, but he's gonna wrestle at the Rumble. And the reason I bring that up is because then you fast forward to I look at the Iron Man match with Shawn and Brett as the match that kind of made me a lifer for pro wrestling. Like from that point on, I kind of knew that like there was no, there was never going to be a couple of years where I just wasn't watching anymore.
Okay.
And so it wasn't that I realized I was become a wrestler at that point, but again, I just knew I was going to be a lifer. And then, it really just came down to a couple of years later, like, just being in high school. And I think they asked a question about what are you going to do with your life? And to me, I was just obsessed with wrestling. So it just made sense to me. And then, I did start doing backyard wrestling, and my mom caught wind of it and saw some of the video and then kind of demanded that I go to wrestling school. So that's what kind of started me uh, into really doing it seriously, going from being a fan to doing the backyard wrestling to now, actually going to a school and training. I guess that's a natural progression.
It's kind of crazy that like your mom saw it and instead of saying don't do that, she was like, at least go do it, but do it the right way and get trained.
Oh, I think it might be looking back now the coolest thing she's ever done because I told her that same thing. I'm like, wow, for you, yeah, to just be recognize that like this is what I'm really into and want to do, and then make that decision. Not everybody would.
No, most parents. I remember wrestling on the trampolines or with friends, and like other than my dad, everybody else would probably be like, "Stop doing that. You're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna hurt somebody else." That's really cool that your mom would be like, "You know what? Just do it the right way."
Yeah, she was horrified though when she saw the bumps. When she saw some of the bumps we were taking and stuff, she really was just adamant about like, I don't want you doing that because you're gonna kill yourself. So
Where did you originally start training? Was it at OVW or did you start at a smaller school first?
no, I started at UPW over here in California, which
Okay.
is a school run by Rick Bassman, who, actually coincidentally, um, had a hand in bringing in the Ultimate Warrior and Sting. into the business. You can look, if you look up his name, they talk all about it. There's all various stuff about it. But and so Rick was basically Rick's school had exposure to WWE. Like they would when WWE come to town, Rick would send his best guys, and and they'd see it. Vince fell in love with anybody essentially, and eventually I was one of the guys Vince fell in love with, but not right away. Like I didn't even get seen right away. I just, I started my training and I ended up getting injured, and so I had to take a couple of years off, and before I came back again, and then I got signed. And in that couple of years is where I took up. I was already bodybuilding, but I really kind of took it up to a serious level. Like, did my homework and figured out how to eat properly and train and all of that, and just really took that on and made that a priority going into my return to wrestling school.
So, what got you into WWE, developmental or OVW, as some people would call it?
Uh, well, so when I came back to UPW, WWE would come to town again. I would started training, and when WWE came to town, and they sent me along with a group of others to the Staples Center, and that's where we get seen. And I think I was pretty much from that first point that they saw me. I was on their radar because I came back and I was really in shape and really young, only 18 years old, I think, but built like a guy well into his 20s. And so I was on their radar, and there were little hints and of that along the way, so I kind of knew that as well. But they didn't sign me right away. It still took a few months, but it wasn't too long from that first time seeing me. It was probably maybe 6 months or so before I then inevitably got signed. And once I got signed is when I went down to OVW.
Was that a big shift for you going all the way? That's across the country, different
Oh yeah,
training school.
well yeah, because I just turned like 18. I was 18 or not going on 19. So I mean, I was so young, but I was totally game for it. But it still doesn't change the fact that it was scary and intimidating and all that stuff. But well, there wasn't any ounce of me that wasn't going to go do it. I was getting paid to go do it too. So it's like,
Yeah.
first world problems.
What was your training like at OVW? Was it a pleasant experience? Is it something that you were fond of?
Well, no, at the time it wasn't. It was kind of dreadful at the time because we would have to be there at like 8 a.m., which for me was kind of the crack of dawn at that point, especially to be getting in the ring. To be getting in the ring at 8 a.m. is just so damn early. And then, it was with Rip Rogers, and Rip would put us through the ringer for a good 4 hours or so. But it was great. At the time, I didn't appreciate it as much because you're going through it and it's so much work. But when I look back at it now, it was such a great style of training to lay a foundation out for a worker, what Rip did. Because really what Rip did was give you all the tools to be able to work. But to me, being able to work also means having the ability to call it on the fly. And a big part of what Rip taught was being able to go out there and just call stuff on the fly and not plan everything. So like, and I think that again, for me to be a good worker, you have to have that ability. If you have to plan every single thing in your match A to Z, um, you know, you might pull off a good match presentation wise, but I don't, you know, I'd like to see what you're going to do if things get messed up, you know?
Yeah. What was like going through your mind when you got called up from OVW to the main WWE roster at the time?
It was just awesome. I don't know, everything was cool, but it was just scary because I was so young, and it was a locker room full of grown men that I'd grown up watching. So, I didn't know necessarily how to handle myself around that, but it was also just very cool. I don't know. Like, I was on the road full time well before I ever debuted. And, I couldn't even rent cars. I was so young, which was funny. And, just learning how to go about just even sorry about the beeping, just learning all the tricks and of the trade of traveling and stuff because that's a process in itself. You're learning how to work, wrestle, and all that, but traveling isn't easy too. It's something you gotta um, really kind of become an expert in itself because there's so many different problems you can run into traveling, and you won't know how to handle it or what to do, especially back then when you didn't have because I remember initially we didn't have GPS when I first got on the road and stuff like that. So that was obviously very difficult. But literally, maybe within a month or two of me getting called up, GPS came out, and I was one of the first on it. So thank goodness for that. But yeah, but I don't know. It was really cool. It was cool, but it was also intimidating.
Yeah. Who is like your first travel partner?
Gene Snitsky.
Oh, it's a big man. Two big guys in the car. That has to be tough.
Oh yeah, he's bigger than me too, man. But like, and it's just funny, man. I love him. What an interesting guy to ride with. My first travel partner on the road. It's so funny. I always tell the story. I mean, the stories about Snitsky are endless and stuff for the Snitskyisms, but the funniest one to me was again, I was talking about GPS around this time too. Wi-Fi had just become a thing, right? As I was on the road, or it wasn't even a thing yet, at least in hotels. And so Gene Snitsky every night on the road, it'd be like we'd be on the road, we'd be do 4 shows a week, and we'd have to drive 200-300 miles sometimes. So long drives. And every night Gene Snitsky would have to stop off at a porn shop to pick up whatever material he needed for the night. But it wouldn't be a fast process either, man. Like he'd go in there and browse. So I'd be like sitting in the car sometimes for 45 minutes to an hour. And then like I would end up having to go in there to try to retrieve him and get pulled into his nasty world. But I remember that because my first introduction to Wi-Fi was when we were on the road. I've come to know that like if we could find a hotel that had Wi-Fi, we didn't have to stop by the porn shop. So we're I was like, we need to find this Wi-Fi so we can avoid this stop because these drives are long. You don't want to stop, have a 45-minute hour stop in addition to your food stop when you already have to drive 3 hours. That's a big ask. So, and then not to mention all the feet that ended up in his mouth. They were all women's feet, let's clarify, but that was a big thing for him. He loved feet. Uh, they were in his mouth quite a bit.
Gene Snitsky sounds like a very interesting man. I might have to get him on here to talk about
Or
maybe
you
not
definitely
all
should.
maybe not all these instances, but maybe some different instances.
He should be on so many more podcasts.
I've heard a lot of great things, a lot of hilarious things, and I'm sure
We
he
call we
has.
call it we call him Uncle Snizzle.
Uncle Snizzle. Okay,
No.
I might have to write that down. So if I get him on here, I can call him that. See what he says. um, your debut was really like one of the first main roster debuts that I can remember. Just the presentation was a masterpiece to say the least. I guess. Um, was there a certain bit of nerves going into such a big presentation, and did it go how like you had thought it would go?
No, no, not at all. There was a lot of nerves, but I've told this story quite a bit. You know what happened is I ended up getting food poisoning. So yeah, I had a lot of nerves, but I was also sick as a dog, like throwing up and crapping, to be quite frank. I couldn't hold any food down. So nerves were almost kind of negated by how sick I was. And it totally kind of messed up the experience. A lot of it's unfortunate because a lot of my pro wrestling career and experience has been had kind of stuff like this. It's just I haven't had the best of luck, let's just say. Like, yeah, I was able to make it in and accomplish some things, but like, I got food poisoning for my debut. This is my debut match on Raw. So, it's the sickest I've ever been in my life. And And when you ask me if it went the way I wanted to, well, starting from there, obviously that part, no, I'm not feeling good. So going into the match, I lost like 10 pounds because I was throwing up so much and couldn't hold anything down. But then when you look back at the match, I also broke Stevie Richards' face. Like I broke his nose and his eye
Yeah.
bone, his orbital bone. And he was really upset and has every reason to be really, like, like yeah, it's not ballet and people make mistakes, but a mistake like that in pro wrestling, a guy has a legit reason to be upset. Like I mean, again, I obviously didn't do it on purpose, but still, it's just like even when I look back at it now, it's like, man, how could you do that? Like it's just, it seems like something that just shouldn't happen, but it accidentally did, and so the whole experience was very tainted because you injure a guy, you're sick as a dog, you lose all that weight. And you were asking about the entrance. As far as the entrance goes, I wasn't comfortable at all with the entrance yet. And like you can kind of see that in it because if you look at it from the first entrance to like a few months later, I'm obviously much more like on point, and I've kind of mastered it, so to speak, much more. But in that first one, everything's very slow. Like I haven't really figured out what I'm gonna do with it yet because it was just we just came up with it that day. So I guess if I would have maybe had some time to work on that, I would have had it more down. But yeah, it was a work in progress, man. You know what I mean? Again,
Yeah.
hitting all those dongs at the right places, the poses and then what to do in between the poses and all those little things like that.
Did your time bodybuilding help you adapt to that?
Oh well, yeah, I thought a little bit, I guess. But I mean, it wasn't any real science to it. I mean, you're just hitting muscular poses. It was more about just the timing of the stuff. You know what I mean? Hitting the dongs and hitting the pose at the right time, and because that isn't as easy as it sounds, especially when you have the pressure of live television. There's millions of people watching you in that moment, and so that's the part where little stuff like that, even you have to have that down.
What would you say is your favorite Master Lock challenge?
Oh, the one with Shawn Michaels for sure, because it was built. We did the Masterlock Challenge, and they went fine and everything, but there wasn't anything that was like main event material or anything like that. And so, we did a bunch of them, and then finally the one with Shawn builds in a way to where the main event of Raw is a Masterlock Challenge of with Shawn Michaels. And then, what we did in the Masterlock Challenge was like the crowd was so into it and stuff. Like it was a great segment, and it was really difficult because going back to what a lot of people won't think about or won't realize, like in a segment like that, like holding Shawn Michaels in the full Nelson for that long a time with the struggling and all the stuff that we're doing is really tough. Like your my forearms would start engorging with blood and like turning purple, and I would literally start going numb in those. If we would do it for long enough. So I remember that was with the Sean segment, that actually being very difficult because we had it on him for a long time. And again, he's not a big guy, obviously, or anything like that. So it was surprising. But yeah, it was very an exciting segment. And again, he's my childhood hero, all time, idol. So to be doing that with him, uh, makes it even that much, or actually 100 times cooler.
At that point in the Raw program, you were a highlighted individual on it. Do you
Yeah.
think it would have been beneficial if at Unforgiven you would have went over Sean?
Uh, no, because I always look at it like this. Well, yeah, it would have been beneficial, but at the same time, Sean had just lost to Hogan the month before.
Yeah,
So with Sean, me looking up to Sean the way I do, I wouldn't even want him to lose to Hogan and then lose to me the next month.
yeah.
Him just giving me a competitive match the way he did was as good as a win for me at that point. Like, yeah, a win would have been awesome, but like I would never expect Shawn to lose to Hogan and then lose to Chris Masters the month after. Like Shawn needs a win in one of those. If Shawn beat Hogan, then that kind of changes everything. Then it would have been like, yeah, that'd been awesome. Give me the win, like by, even if it's just the heel finish. But I wouldn't even expect it in that case. But like I'm just saying, if you know, because I'm not looking at, I'm looking at the big picture of things. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah,
like okay, how would that work for Shawn? And so it only worked for Shawn if he didn't lose both matches.
fair enough. Was there ever any plans for you guys to do more? Like, was there ever a series planned or anything like that?
Well, no, not necessarily because what Survivor Series comes up, and if you look at what happened, like I worked with Shawn all over the world on live events and stuff like that. And we were kind of intertwined for the next few months, but indirectly. And a lot of it was because, we were working kind of different tag matches. It'd be Carlito and me versus Shawn and Flair and different stuff like that at live events. But then once TV started moving from there, we really quickly started building to Survivor Series, which is where now all of a sudden, we're kind of aligned with Shawn, right? Like it was Carly, me, Shawn, and uh, shoot, whoever else I can't remember right now, but you know, damn,
I
who was
don't.
it? I
I
can't
can't.
remember right now.
I
Yeah,
can
but
find it real quick.
but either way, so that was why that didn't run. I think originally they had meant for Shawn and Hogan to possibly work for 3 matches, right? People have talked about that. And then inevitably, I think it would have been Survivor Series time. So really, after the Hogan thing got short, that was one of the matches he had with Hogan. And so then I was kind of maybe, like I probably got that opportunity because now the Hogan thing wasn't happening. So now we needed to fill time, there. So now I get the match with Shawn, and now we're only a month away from Survivor Series, and or then Taboo Tuesday was right before that, I think, actually.
Yeah,
So
it was
things were
taboo.
moving. Yeah, things were moving really fast in a way where it was hard to like get married into a program. Like I know, I think there was a one program in the company, and at that point it was, or not in the company, but on Raw, and it was just the world title picture, and the IC picture. Outside of that, it was kind of a mixed bag. Or Matt Hardy and Edge were going too.
Yeah,
Yeah, they had a rivalry that went a while, and then I don't remember who Hunter was working at that point. Hunter wasn't even in a long rivalry. He was doing different things.
he was kind of in the shuffle as well at that point. That
Yes.
was
Yeah.
after Evolution and
Yep.
stuff like that because Batista was on SmackDown.
Yeah, like he might have worked Big Show or something. Like I
Yeah,
think I don't know. Yeah, he
this
did some, but he didn't have any 4 or 5 months rivalry. Like so, Edge and uh, Hardy had one, but nobody else really did. I guess at that point, it was really just everything was just moving too quick until Survivor Series was done.
you mentioned Carlito, and that's somebody you was a tag team with for quite some time. Do you like have a favorite Carlito moment or a favorite match that you guys tagged with or anything like that?
Oh, man, that's really tough because there's a lot with Carly. I just, I like we worked the match on the Indies. The last match we worked on the Indies, I thought was really funny because we worked a whole spot into the match where I end up, he's selling something and I go and grab his apple and take a bite out of it, and I'm going like, I go walk up to him like I'm gonna spit it on him, and he hits me with like a chop to the throat. And then, like in the ring there, I start choking on the apple. And the referee comes around and starts trying to give me the Heimlich maneuver to no avail. And then Carlito, even, he kind of recovers and then he sees what's happening. And then he comes over and he tries to give it to me. And that doesn't work. And then he just says, screw it, and gives me his finish, the backstabber. And there, the apple comes shooting out of my mouth.
That's
And
amazing.
then, of course, he has to pin me for the 1, 2, 3. And I just thought that was such a ridiculous but funny finish, and it works. I mean, you can find it; it's on YouTube. But it was a funny little deal, and we really, you know, I just really played it like I was choking on the apple, and that's what really kind of made it, I think. But and then to see the apple shooting out as he's giving me the backstabber is just classic. And then of course we make up after the match. There's a hug, because yeah, he pinned me, but at least he got the apple out. So, you know, smiles on faces all around.
Would you like to ever get back in there and tag with Carlito?
Oh, absolutely. But I don't know if that'll ever happen. It's not up to me necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Um, Somebody else I want to ask about is, it is Cena's last year. And like I mentioned earlier, you and Cena were really intertwined, especially when you was with Carlito. Um, is he somebody like before he hangs up the jorts for the last time that you'd like to cinch in that master lock one more time on?
Oh, of course, I'd love to work with him again, but I don't know. I don't think John Cena ever cared for me too much, so I'm sure he wouldn't really, you know, I'm sure it wouldn't really matter too much if he worked me or not in his retirement run or anything. You know what I mean? I think he'd have more nostalgia off of working with somebody like Kurt Angle, obviously, or even Carlito, because Carly, of course, Carly beat him for the
U.S. title.
yeah, so there's a little more history there, but of course, if given the opportunity, I'd love to work with him again. I mean, because he's the Hulk Hogan of your generation.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you were one of the many heels that um, got to try to take him down. Is that something like a moment that you cherish? Do you ever think about those times? And
The funny part with Cena and me is like we were talking about UPW.
mhm.
Cena and me, when I first started as a kid, started there at basically the same time, maybe even the same day. So I've known Cena since I was really young.
Huh.
And we just never really mixed that great. Like, I don't know, maybe it'd be different nowadays, but we were always kind of like oil and water a little bit. And but to go to what you're saying, it was more so about like I have those feelings about Shawn when I'm working with Shawn, Hunter, Flair, those guys. Not as like I recognize Cena for being what we just said he was. He was the Hulk Hogan of your generation, and then therefore of my generation in the business. But it's not like I'm grateful to have worked him, but like it was working John Cena wasn't necessarily on the bucket list of things in pro wrestling to do. Working with the top guy was, so in that sense, definitely. But because he's so loved and everything and so celebrated, obviously just having that looking back now under your belt is a cool thing to have. Yeah, I got to work with him quite a bit.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit. The Masterlock challenge would eventually be broken by Bobby Lashley. Is that
Sure.
something like you wish wouldn't have been broken, or did you like to have the moment where Bobby breaks it?
Well, I wouldn't say I like it. And it would have been better looking back now for it to not have been broken. But uh, for me, at the time, I just looked at it like if it was to be broken, Bobby Lashley was the right guy because
Okay.
he was the guy who would benefit from it the most. Just with the way he looks, it made the most sense because the only real other person than him that it could be that would kind of make sense, at least from a physical standpoint, is Batista, but he didn't really need it. He was the world champion already and everything else. But Bobby, on the other hand, was on the rise, and they were going into the Donald Trump angle, so it just made a lot more sense. But still, from a selfish standpoint, it would have been better for me for it not. And them even considering that to be one of the things to push him is probably one of the points where Vince, almost mentally demoted me in his head a little bit. If they're going to sacrifice the master lock at that point.
If not Bobby, who would you have chose to break the master lock?
That's the thing I don't know. Because I mean, I could obviously just look at the biggest guys in the company like Big Show, Kane, or Batista. But again, to go back to what we're just saying, they didn't really necessarily need it. So But like again, just to protect the hold, I would pick those guys because like if I pick a Shawn Michaels or Rey Mysterio, that's not doing anything for me, is it?
No.
Right? So like yeah, like I mean, just for from looking out for myself standpoint, I'd pick one of those guys. But
Okay.
again, like I don't know what it would necessarily do for any one of them. Like maybe it could benefit one of the three of them, but probably not as much as it did Bobby at that point.
I am going to jump forward a little bit forward again. In 2011, TNA was doing work in India with a company called Rinka King. Or
Yeah,
I'm probably terrible with names, but
no, that's
what
it.
was your experience like? Working with them in India, and did you enjoy going over to India and being a part of that program?
Oh yeah, I did. It was a lot of fun. It was my first time working with Jeff Jarrett, so and I enjoyed that experience. And it could be difficult being in India for that long because a lot of places in India outside of the cities can be very third world. But and the food is good, but it can be challenging when that's all you're eating is Indian food,
Hmm.
morning to night. Uh, and then from a wrestling standpoint, I mean, the production and everything was first class all the way. The challenge of that was, all of us imports or Americans they brought over had to work with guys from India who, essentially had no experience. They just trained. So we were all kind of handpicked to work with these guys because, Jeff felt that we could work with these green guys and, pull decent matches out of them, which, we essentially did. So it was a fun experience, challenging, but fun.
Did working with Jeff at that time maybe aid in getting you to be a part of GFW or Global Force Wrestling later?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you come in for somebody, you have a good working experience. And, with a guy like Jeff, you end up in his Rolodex for whatever projects or things he might have upcoming in the future. So that's essentially what happened doing Rick and King, and then once he started GFW, and then obviously Impact Wrestling from there.
Do you know what like the initial plans were for GFW or at least for you? 'Cause I know it didn't get to go as far as
Uh,
maybe they wanted it.
well, I mean, I think gonna end up working with Nick Aldis. I think Nick was gonna be the champion, and he was gonna try to get a TV deal, I think, and kind of start his own thing again. But then I think Impact Wrestling had called him in, and then they merged the two. So, it kind of got muddied a little bit by that. But I think initially, because I remember we did a taping in Vegas that ended with me, like Aldis and me having a confrontation.
Mhm.
So I ended up busting him open, hardwaying him though. So it
Okay.
wasn't even planned. He wasn't too happy with me over that, but it was an accident.
You did get to be a part of the Impact GFW kind of invasion angle when GFW invaded Impact. Did you enjoy did you enjoy working with the stable, the GFW stable, and what do you think like would have made that storyline more successful?
I don't know what it would have made it more successful. I don't. I just think it was kind of again the booking was very muddied. I think because of all the moving pieces. Bruce Pritchard going out, Jim Cornette, and then Jeff Jarrett coming back in. So I just know I enjoyed the experience of it. Getting to work the Impact Zone and be a part of that, which I hadn't. I'd come in, I think, and worked a dark match for them once, but hadn't really been a part of the show. So it's cool, and I got to meet LA Knight not meet LA Knight for the first time, but work with him quite a bit, and so I became a big advocate for him, and yeah, it was cool. It was a cool experience, cool little time there. But I don't know what it
Did
would. I don't know what have made it more successful. It's hard to even remember back everything that was going on at that point because it was just, again, a lot of moving pieces.
did you see Eli Drake at the time becoming what he is now, LA Knight? Did you see that potential in him?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Because I've known. to me, when LA Knight got over to the WWE universe, to a lot of the people that know him and the fans of Impact Wrestling, I mean, it isn't really any different. It's the same guy that they saw in Impact Wrestling. The only difference is the name. He's not Eli Drake. And he doesn't use dummies as much. That's it. So, and
Uh,
it's a fun, that yeah thing is a real fun thing to say. And the way he does it is very infectious.
do you think the criticisms of him being like labeled a rock or like a stone cold are valid, or do you think he's his own entity?
Oh, no, I don't think they're valid. I guess you could bring that up, and I know it's been brought up like by Kevin Nash and stuff, but I don't know. He's his own little, everybody's kind of a little mix of various people, you know what I mean? Just because LA Knight might be 50% Stone Cold, 50% Rock, and, kind of mixed up and made trying to make his own, I don't see as any big issue. You know what I mean? He hasn't stolen anything directly, any catchphrases directly from Rock or Austin. And I don't know. I don't see, I just feel like also, too, when you look at that, enough time has passed as well. Like it maybe be a lot more glaring if he was trying to do that within, back 10 or 15 years ago. But to do it now is kind of like, I think that's why he's gone over. It's almost a breath of fresh air because you haven't had that in a while. So,
And with that said, I think it even goes a long way for him that Austin or Rock hasn't came out and said, "Hey, I don't like this," or "Hey, he's stealing my stuff." Then maybe it'd
and
be different.
they wouldn't, because I think they'd probably I think most guys like seeing their influence on somebody. They might not want to see you directly steal their stuff, you know what I mean, like blatantly, but to see their influence is a whole nother thing. It's like, oh, I influence. You can tell I influence that, you know what I mean, or whatever. I mean, I guess a lot of people steal moves, but there's only so many moves out there you can do. You know what I mean? You have to ask Shawn how he feels about everybody super kicking nowadays, right? So, you know, I don't know. I just don't see it as an issue with LA Knight. You know what I mean? I just think he is a bit of that, but he's not coming out there and saying finally LA Knight has come back to Los Angeles, or if you smell what LA Knight are cooking, or that's the bottom line because LA Knight said so. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, he wears a vest. I don't know. It's fine.
Sometimes I see the comparisons, and other times I don't.
Yeah,
It's
I
something
mean,
that's
I don't know. Nothing there is directly, blatantly. You can't see the hairstyle or anything directly. So I don't know. It's been long enough, and it's fine, man. Everybody in this business is influenced. You could probably take every single wrestler and put them out there and kind of look at them and find some kind of influence of somebody out there. You know what I mean? Like whether it's their attire or their hair or whatever, their body.
I know like for you when you first initially came out as the masterpiece, there was a lot of like said influence from like Paul Orndorff or the narcissist Lex Luger. Are those places that you took a lot of inspiration
No,
from?
that was the funny part because like I wasn't a Luger fan at all, so I
Okay.
didn't really like that comparison. And Paul Orndorff was before my time, but like even watching Paul, I appreciated his ability, but I wasn't a fan of his look or anything like that.
Okay.
So uh Rick Rude was more kind of my cup of tea. Like I liked Rick Rude. I mean,
I love it.
my main influences in wrestling were, like Rick Rude definitely was one, but Mr. Perfect, Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, Bret Hart. So to me, I didn't plan on necessarily coming in and being a body guy, so to speak. It just kind of happened that way. You know what I mean? I ended up taking up bodybuilding, and I ended up being, like all of my peers were really built, but I became uh, specifically, the built guy. You know what I mean? Like, and so for me, it was just, I don't know. I didn't necessarily see that coming. I mean, I knew I was going to work on my body and build myself up, but I didn't realize I was going to be, given a gimmick and kind of like categorized as a body guy and compared to Luger or Orndorff and and that whole kind of archetype of wrestler. But it was fine. It was kind of my ticket to get in. But I think if you look at my work in the last couple of years, it was probably more so what I probably originally wanted to do, which is, not necessarily be like such a big hulking guy that can't bump around because he's so big and it doesn't make sense. But, be a guy, a little smaller, but to the point where you can be more athletic around the ring and move around a bit more.
I'm going to jump back to TNA because
Sure.
recently they have been rebranded as TNA. Would you ever consider going back to Impact Wrestling and being under the new regime?
Absolutely. I'm open to any opportunity. I mean, I'm still wrestling as my full-time job, but on the indies. So for me, like, any kind of opportunity would be welcome because, I've done the indie wrestling thing for quite a while, but, I think anybody who's in this business for this long, you definitely would want more than just that. You want a platform to work on. You want a consistent check first and foremost, but also, as a performer, you don't want to be working a different independent show every week with a standalone match. You want to be a part of something. You want the consistent check, like I said, but you want, a program, something that your character is vying for or working towards, or, something you can build off of from week to week. That's what you really crave as a performer. Cash and creative, like they say.
Uh, in the last couple years, you got to be a part of the NWA, and pretty much right after you got there, you won the NWA National Championship. How did it feel to have that company behind you right away and represent them by holding that championship?
Well, it was really cool for all the reasons I just said. It was cool to be now, I'd done the Impact Wrestling thing, but, that was what it was. But when at the time when the NWA Wrestling opportunity came, I was really kind of ready for it. We were coming out of COVID and like, yeah, it was cool to have their backing and given the opportunity and have a platform, and, to be able to show here's me now. And also that platform kind of gave me an opportunity to try to, when you have a platform like that, you also have an opportunity to evolve your character and try stuff. You know what I mean? That's a big thing. So, I was able to do some of that, try to evolve my character and my look a little bit and stuff like that. And, you know, just get away from the guy that they saw, 20 years ago, whatever it's been.
You were champion for 200 plus days. Is
Yeah.
there a favorite title defense that you had throughout your duration as champion?
Oh man, I liked all the string of matches I was having at that point. I worked with James Storm and I had a great match, and Crimson and I had a great match, kind of in his hometown where I dropped the belt. Like uh, the Sinister Minister and me had a great. Yeah, I was having great matches with everybody with that belt. Really, like I was really cooking. So I was really kind of liking the opportunity with NWA, and was hoping that I could take it much farther. Like in my mind, I wanted to definitely try to vie for the NWA World Title, and if nothing else, just to have get the notoriety of that. Hopefully create more opportunities in pro wrestling. And obviously it'd be cool to have that in your legacy that you leave behind. Like you were a NWA World Champion at one point. So, but didn't end up happening.
Something like recently that I've really noticed, and you brought up inspiration from the likes of Shawn Michaels. Lately, the gear is looking kind of like 90s Shawn. You're getting the long hair. Is that kind of the route you're kind of going?
Well, like so, like I'm not. I'd never go out there wearing chaps or anything like that.
No.
But the I knew that I want like so when I was with NWA, I knew I wanted like I got in touch with the wrestling fan in me, and I realized that like I needed to kind of base myself. I needed to make my younger self become a fan of what I was doing, and so I was like, what were the things I liked as a kid? And entrance gear was a big thing to me. And I knew that I didn't want to wear a robe and I wasn't going to do the cape like I had been in WWE. So what could I do? And I know that I'd always wanted to take, Shawn's attires from back then were obviously very cool. So I didn't want to necessarily do the chops and all that, but I did want to do, a vest that was a cross between like a vest that were a cross between like a gladiator and some of HBK stuff with all the different chain link and designs and stuff like that. So definitely a lot of influence there. And then like the hair thing, you definitely say would be, but it wasn't necessarily planned. I know that just Tom Latimer and myself made a pact to not, he had shaved the sides of his hair and had it long on top, so he had to cut his. And then it was about my length, and we both made the pact to grow our hair. And you know, I didn't end up actually think I would end up liking it. I thought I would have cut it before it got real long, but it ended up being like another thing, like, oh, cool, this is something I can do to just give me myself a new look, which I don't know, I just think is important. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to be, especially for a guy like me who's been around in wrestling this long now, it's just important to not, to change your presentation around so you don't look the same. And like, even more so just for myself looking in the mirror every day, you get sick of seeing yourself with the same either hairstyle, whatever, year in and year out. So like, I always look at it too, just from that standpoint, like, whatever, I just want something different, you know?
Definitely.
But when you
Being
look at it, all together, definitely you can see HBK influence for sure.
just a little bit, being in the business so long, what do you do to maintain that fire and to maintain that love for the business?
It can be tough sometimes because it can be love hate relationship with it. But I mean, still, it's my first and kind of only love. So even at its toughest, like I said, I mean, it just goes. It's a roller coaster ride. It goes through different phases and stuff. But like, you know, when we went through the pandemic and going into NWA, in that time, I was really able to reconnect with my fandom again, and like, I just wish, and it really made me approach myself as a wrestler differently in a lot of ways. Again, it made me kind of concentrate on pleasing 8-year-old me and not worrying about everybody else, which would have been very helpful, that kind of stuff early in my career if I would have approached it like that. Because then you're not, it's a lot more simple when you think about it in those terms. Like, okay, well, you're not going to please everybody, right? But like, you know, what is it about me? You just have to take an honest look at yourself, right? Like, and be like, okay, I either like this or I don't. I like this gear or I don't like this gear, or this walk is lame or it's not. You know what I mean? And ditch
Yeah.
that stuff. But like, so I don't know. I don't know. It goes through different phases. But I was, again, it's my. I'll always know that I love, like, wrestling is my ultimate passion. So it'll be really hard for somebody to completely take that away from me and it just to not exist anymore completely.
Have you ever considered or thought about doing like opening a training school or joining a training school and teaching the crop of next talent?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I thought about all that stuff. I mean, it's all on the table. It's just, you know, do you want to start your own? Like, the idea of starting my own school is very daunting, and then you got to keep, how do you keep an influx of students and all? And are you in the right place for that, or is it already saturated? But you know, when you bring that up, it only makes sense to me that if you're going to devote that long to a profession and become an expert to that level, that it would be in your best interest to try to still utilize it in a way like that, like you're saying, whether it be teaching it or being a producer in, with one of the companies, helping to put together the matches with the talent or whatever, you know.
Is that something like when you go to some of these shows that you find yourself ever doing, being in the locker room with younger talent?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, I work with younger talent a lot. I work with younger talent more than I do like my peers,
Yeah.
so to speak. Like, and so in those experiences, I don't look at it like I'm like, oh, just out there. I look at it like, yeah, we're out here to entertain the crowd and we're work each other, but I also look at it like I'm working and teaching this guy. Because when you got a guy who's only 3 or 4 years in, working a guy who's got 20 years in, there's just really no other way to look at it. Like, dude, you're so green, you don't even realize how green you are, type thing. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean I don't take their input and stuff. Like, I'll ask them if they have ideas and stuff like that, and then I'll listen to their ideas, and then if there's a problem with their ideas, I'll point it out to them. Like, well, here's the issue with that. This doesn't make sense for whatever. And I'll point out to why it doesn't make sense, and then and that try to teach them, and then obviously we do the match, and then whenever we come to the back, there's always some kind of feedback for them. Usually, they're like either put more behind your strikes or feed better in the comeback or whatever the hell it is.
Back when in the day, you hear a lot of stories about how tough the locker room was. As some would consider you the veteran of the locker room. Is that something you try to make different nowadays? Like you try to make the ever go in the locker room and try to say, "Hey, I'm
Yeah,
not
I
going to
mean,
make it
and
like."
I didn't consciously try necessarily to do that. I mean, I guess I might have personally because I just handle situations differently being the vet now than it was handled, against me when I was green coming in. But it's also just a byproduct of my generation. Like we are, and the generation it is softer. Each generation has gone softer, and like my generation we experienced the last bit of the all those guys who were in the territories and that rougher point you're talking about, but we didn't really carry a lot of it and pass it on to a lot of guys for better and for worse, because yeah, we weren't bullies to a lot of these guys, but at the same time we also didn't really check them as much as they needed to, which is why you'll get certain guys who don't understand the etiquette the way they should in terms of, you do shake people's hand in the locker room. Like, and it's not meant to be a thing that's like, oh my God, I got to shake everybody's hand or I'm going to be stressed out. But, nowadays, like, it would still be frowned upon. Like, and it's understand that like it would be disrespectful to not like, you're not going to shake my hand at any point. But I'm also, like, I don't think any of us are looking for that guy. Like, oh, he didn't shake my hand. So everybody, let's treat him like garbage and he's got heat and yada, yada, yada. And like, you know, it's addressed differently by us, because I know I've been in these situations where I've had to tell talent like, yo, why'd you just not even, you didn't even come up to me and say anything? But you realize too a lot with these guys, a lot of times they're intimidated and stuff. And so like, and which is no different than what I was. So, you give them the pass in those situations when you kind of realize stuff like that. It's not necessary to come down with an iron fist on them. But if it's not that, then that's where you would have to be. It's on us to still be stern, and point it out and not just let it go. And I don't, what I mean? I always voice this stuff when I feel it necessary.
If you're in the locker room and a younger talent ever approaches you for advice, what kind of advice do you like to hand off?
Well, I mean that's just such a broad question. It's usually like, because I mean, where do you even start? Right? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's so much advice you could give. It's just, it's usually more about like if talent comes up to me, it's usually like, hey, can you watch my match later? Or uh, if I have watched it, they ask for whatever feedback I saw, and I look for it because a lot of it is just like when you've been doing it this long, that's one thing that makes teaching really easy. It's very easy to just watch it and point out all these little things, because there's a lot of things they'll do, like their footwork will be terrible, they'll be taking way more steps than they need to, and that doesn't sound like much, but then when you're watching it, all you notice is like, oh, this guy just doesn't look confident, or he doesn't look polished. You might not even know it's because he's taken 10 steps. You just know that he doesn't look polished. But I'm looking at that and I know that like, oh, he's just taking way too many steps, so he looks nervous and And like, I'm just talking about that's just a particular scenario in a match, right? That what I'm
Yeah,
saying. But those are like kind of the examples of advice I'll give. But it's always usually best with the guys that I've worked with because when you get in there and you're able to dance with each other, there's a lot more help you have to give.
definitely. Um, Masters, my last question is seeing as how we are so fresh into 2025, what are your goals for this year?
That's a good question. I would say that I don't know. My goal is to make something happen in professional wrestling beyond the indies because well, I said this before in an interview not too long ago, very recently actually. I'm at a crossroads. I love professional wrestling, but I can't also just be dithering on the independent wrestling scene. So, my goal is to make something happen in professional wrestling, and if I don't, to pivot. It doesn't mean I need to quit pro wrestling, but pivot meaning either try to, like you were talking about, teach it or do something else in it, or just do something else completely. You know what I mean? Well, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like focus more on commercial work or training people, fitness training people. I don't know, whatever. You know what I mean? I have to keep an open mind with that. Like I thought about firefighting, but honestly, being out here in Los Angeles with the fires we get, as you seen, with those
Could
fires
be
we got a
rough.
couple of weeks ago, were a rude awakening about like, oh, maybe I don't want to be a firefighter in Los Angeles, California. So, but I mean, honestly, wrestling's my ultimate love. So I'm hoping, obviously, I'm hoping that I can make something happen there. But again, it's been a long time, and I don't want to just continue on the independent wrestling scene and that be it, because then you're looking at a finish like Mickey Rourke in that movie, The Wrestler, and that is definitely not what I want.
Understood. Uh, Before we go, are there any social medias or anything you want to plug to let the fans know where they can find you coming up next?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram. That's my preferred platform, and that's Chris Masters 310. And Twitter is, or X as we call it now, is at Chris Adonis. So I'm on there sporadically. And yeah, those are the main. And for booking appearances and whatnot, you could reach out at masterpiece83@gmail.com.
Sounds good. Masters, thank you. This was a great time. I like to jump into my childhood sometime. Maybe we can do it again. Maybe we can get you on here for a part two and we could talk about some different stuff.
Yeah, it was fun. It didn't feel like an interview. It just felt like we were just chatting it up a little bit. So I enjoyed that. We should have a cup of Joe over here, sipping on coffee or something.
Next time, that's what we'll do. I
Sounds good,
just want to
man.
say thank you, and I can't wait to do this again. I'll
Yeah,
leave it to
yeah.
see you next time.
All right, man. I appreciate you.
Of course.